Hello everybody, so today I want to quickly look through some attribute types. Let's start by creating a piece of geometry again. Maybe I'll just create a sphere this time. It doesn't really matter what it is, because I'm wanting to make a custom attribute and then look at its type. So in order to do that, we'll add an attribute create node. Super. And I'll give it a name. I'll just call it test, and you'll see that I have this attribute test which is 0.0 all the way down. Let's go through the types here, and the first one I actually want to look at is integer. Integer is the most basic type. It's basically a whole number. There's no decimal places with this one, and so when I'm adding the value, it's just going to be in whole numbers. As you can see, it changing there, 14, 15, etc. right here, right? This one you will use, let me go back there. This one is really used for things like when you're trying to talk about point numbers, sometimes with IDs, also primitive numbers, things which don't need a digital decimal point. You would use an integer, and you'll use these fairly frequently. Let's go to the next one. Next one will be a float value. Float value just adds that decimal place to it, and you can add as many decimal places to that as you like. Yeah, and that's basically a float value, so it's looking at numbers, not just whole numbers, but numbers which are in between. Float actually stands for floating point value, but it's reduced or abbreviated to float in Houdini and in most applications. Vector we've looked at before. A vector suddenly has 3 values, so you notice there that we had the float, which was just 1 value. The vector here has 3 values, and in this case it's x, y and z, and of course I can now move these numbers around, increase or decrease these numbers, and it will give me these options here in the vector. It also has a 4th value here, but I can't find a way to create a vector 4 directly from this vector tab. So let's ignore that one for now, and let's move on to string. String just allows me to put in some text, so I'll call this testy. There we go, and that's put in that text there. This will become useful in certain situations too. And the others, they're all arrays, and they're dictionary. Array is basically just a list, but I'm going to cover these in another lesson. I did mention the vector 4. When would you use a vector 4? You won't use them very often, but you often may need to use them with rotation in Houdini, where you use something called quaternions. There's a few ways actually that you can do rotations in Houdini. None of them I find particularly straightforward, but quaternion would use a vector 4, and I would normally just create this in vex. However, I believe it can probably be done in the attribute create node as well by going into the float, and then it gives me an option here, size. Say I've got 1 column, I can use this, and now I get into 2 columns, which will be a vector 2. This I'm assuming will be the same as a vector, and this one here is a vector 4. Okay, so you do have this option here where you can add more to the size, which will create more components to that. Okay, so anyway, I hope that was a little bit useful explaining some of these types here. Any questions, leave them below, and you guys have a great day.